On February 1, 2024, something happened that should have set off every crisis alarm in America, but most people missed it completely. New York Community Bancorp, the 46th largest bank in the U.S., suddenly slashed its dividend by 71% and revealed $552 million in unexpected losses, all from commercial real estate loans. This wasn't just one bank having a bad day. This was the moment a $3 trillion time bomb started its countdown. Welcome to the real estate collapse that could make 2008 look like a practice round. Today I'm going to show you the 5-stage pattern that destroys every real estate bubble in history. Why 2025 and 2026 could trigger losses that dwarf the subprime mortgage crisis, and how a system designed to create wealth for the few might just impact the middle class all over again. Here's the situation. Over the next 2 years, a staggering $1 trillion in commercial real estate loans will mature and need refinancing. Think about it. Properties bought when interest rates were around 3% must now refinance at 7 or even 8%. Buildings that were worth $100 million in 2021 might only be worth $60 million today. The math is simple, and the potential pain is unprecedented. But what should really get your attention is that this isn't just about office buildings and shopping malls. It's about how debt cycles can affect broader economic stability. And just like in 2008, the same patterns of risk and reward are playing out. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these major real estate crashes aren't just random accidents. They often follow a predictable cycle that tends to repeat every 15 to 20 years with almost mathematical precision. This is what some are calling the setup for a massive wealth transfer. So, let's break it down. This is stage 1 of 5, the setup phase. Every major real estate collapse begins in a remarkably similar way. It starts when monetary policy creates conditions that encourage taking on significant debt, right before the rules of the game change. It's not necessarily a conspiracy, but a predictable outcome of policy decisions. Let's look back at the 2008 crash. It really started back in 2001 when the Federal Reserve slashed interest rates to 1% after the dot-com bubble burst. For the next 7 years, money was essentially free. Banks offered no money down mortgages, interest-only payments, and the infamous ninja loans: no income, no job, no assets. The middle class, feeling priced out by soaring home values, took on debt they couldn't realistically afford, just to get a piece of what looked like a guaranteed path to wealth. Now, fast forward to today. The current bubble started in almost the exact same way. After the 2008 crash, the Fed kept interest rates near zero for 7 years straight. Then, the pandemic response provided the reason to print trillions of dollars and push rates below 1% again. Commercial real estate developers borrowed trillions at 2 to 3%. Residential home buyers took on record mortgage debt. Private equity firms used cheap leverage to buy up millions of homes. But here's the key insight. The institutions providing all this cheap money understood the cycle. They weren't just trying to help the economy. They were participating in a market driven by specific incentives. When you make money virtually free, asset prices tend to explode. When asset prices explode, people and companies take on massive debt to get in on the action. And then, when everyone is leveraged to the max, the conditions change. Interest rates go up. This is the classic boom-bust cycle. Low rates fuel the boom, and high rates trigger the bust. The Federal Reserve has now raised rates at the fastest pace in 40 years, from nearly 0 to over 5%. The free money era is over. The trap has been sprung. The very same debt that created so much paper wealth is now set to trigger its collapse, and we are just getting started. In the next video, we'll dive into stage 2, where the first cracks begin to show and the smart money starts quietly heading for the exits. Let us go back to March 2022. The Federal Reserve kicked off the fastest interest rate hike in 40 years. In just 18 months, rates skyrocketed from near 0 to 5.5%. What did this do? It made every commercial real estate loan, every adjustable rate mortgage, and every line of credit massively more expensive. The trap was set. The numbers are genuinely mind-boggling. There's $3 trillion in outstanding commercial real estate debt. Just by the end of 2025, $560 billion of that is due. Office vacancy rates have hit 13.2%. The highest ever recorded, and since 2022, commercial property values have plunged by 22%. The real danger. Small banks. They are holding $1.9 trillion in commercial real estate loans, leaving them completely exposed. This is stage 1 of a script that's been repeating for 2 centuries. First, make money cheap to inflate asset prices. Then watch as the middle class takes on debt to get in on the action. Finally, make money expensive, triggering a wave of defaults. It's a pattern that works, and it's happening again. Right now, we are deep in stage 2, the denial phase. This is when the obvious problems are ignored or explained away, while the crisis bubbles up right under the surface. Despite overwhelming evidence of a systemic problem, officials and experts keep telling us everything is fine. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen recently said commercial real estate poses no systemic risk. The Fed insists. Their stress tests show banks have enough capital. But the data tells a very different story. Small banks, those with assets between $100 million and $1 billion, have commercial real estate loans that are worth more than 158% of their capital. Mid-sized banks are even worse, at 228%. This means their exposure is more than double their total capital. Think about it. If just 20% of these loans go bad, these banks are insolvent, and it's not just commercial real estate. The housing market looks eerily similar to 2006 in 2024. The median home price hit $418,000. To afford that, a family needs an income of over $118,000 a year, but the actual median household income is just $83,000. The gap between what homes cost and what people can actually afford is now wider than it was at the peak of the 2006 housing bubble. So what makes this time different? In 2008, the crisis was mostly contained to subprime mortgages, about $1.3 trillion in bad loans. Today, the crisis is everywhere. We've got $3 trillion in commercial real estate debt, $12 trillion in residential mortgages, $1.7 trillion in auto loans, and $1.8 trillion in credit card debt. The total debt bubble is over $17 trillion, more than 10 times the size of the subprime crisis. When this bubble bursts, it won't just hit the housing market. It will hit everything. Stage 2 isn't just about denial, though. It's also about positioning. While officials tell you not to worry, the smart money is quietly moving to safety. Warren Buffett is holding $325 billion in cash, the most in Berkshire Hathaway's history. Jeff Bezos sold $13 billion in Amazon stock. Major hedge funds are placing huge bets against regional banks and commercial real estate. The insiders who helped create this bubble are preparing for the collapse while telling the public that everything is fine. That's classic Stage 2 behavior. Maintain public confidence while you position yourself for profit. Now we're starting to see the early warning signs of Stage 3, Cascade failure. This is when all these interconnected problems trigger a systemic collapse that spreads faster than anyone can contain it. Earlier this year, New York Community Bancorp revealed massive commercial real estate losses and had to slash its dividend. Deutsche Bank quadrupled its provisions for U.S. real estate losses. Japan's Azora Bank warned of major losses on its U.S. commercial property investments. These aren't isolated incidents. They are the first dominoes starting to fall. The system is more fragile than we're being told, and the warning signs are flashing red. It's crucial to pay attention to what the data is saying, not just the official narrative. Get ready for the cascade. It starts with commercial real estate. When those big property loans come due, refinancing isn't an option. Owners will default. Banks holding these loans, they're about to report huge losses and slam the brakes on all lending. This credit crunch will force even more defaults, as anyone relying on loans loses their lifeline. As property values plummet, leveraged investors will get margin calls they can't meet. Then, the residential market follows. As banks fail and credit vanishes, mortgages will become nearly impossible to get. With no buyers, home prices will tank, triggering a wave of foreclosures. This isn't just about real estate, it's about your wealth. Falling home prices will wipe out household savings, slash consumer spending, and push the economy straight into a recession. But this time, it's uniquely dangerous. Unlike 2008, when most people had fixed-rate mortgages, millions today are exposed. They have adjustable-rate mortgages, home equity lines of credit, and second mortgages all tied to soaring interest rates. As rates stay high, their payments are becoming unsustainable. The math is brutal. A $500,000 mortgage at 3% is about $2,100 a month. But at 7%, it's over $3,300. That's a $1,200 increase every single month. For families already battling inflation, it's a catastrophe. Commercial real estate is in an even worse position. Imagine buying an office building at peak 2021 prices with a 3% loan. Now, you need to refinance at 8%, while the building's value has crashed by 50%. It's already happening. Brookfield, one of America's biggest real estate players, defaulted on $161 million in LA office tower loans this year. And that's just the first tremor. An analyst at S&P Global says 44% of all office building loans are already underwater. We're talking about $420 billion in negative equity before the real refinancing wave even hits. The cascade will accelerate because our financial system is a web of dominoes. When a regional bank fails, it triggers a credit crisis that infects other banks. Insurance companies holding commercial mortgage-backed securities will face staggering losses. Pension funds invested in real estate will watch their assets evaporate. And here's the scary part. The Federal Reserve is out of ammo. In 2008, they could slash interest rates from 5% to 0. Today, rates are already high, and they have little room to cut. The government is buried under $36 trillion in debt. When this crisis fully erupts, the old rescue playbook won't work. This leads to the final, brutal stage, a massive wealth transfer. This is when assets are sold for pennies on the dollar to those with cash on the sidelines, permanently concentrating wealth. Every real estate crash works this way. Overleveraged owners are forced to sell at any price. Cash-rich buyers swoop in and acquire those assets for massive discounts. It's a transfer of wealth from the many to the few. In the Great Depression, families lost their farms. In the 2008 crisis, private equity firms like Blackstone bought up 200,000 foreclosed homes. The same playbook is being prepared right now. Giants like Blackstone, KKR, and Apollo are raising hundreds of billions in dry powder funds, specifically to buy distressed real estate. Warren Buffett is sitting on a mountain of cash, ready for this moment. Sovereign wealth funds from around the world are poised to buy American assets at bargain basement prices. Here's how it will play out. As commercial buildings default, private equity will dominate foreclosure auctions. Office towers that cost $100 million to build will sell for $30 million. They'll convert them into apartments or data centers and make a fortune, while the original investors lose everything. The residential market will see the same script. As families face foreclosure, investment firms will buy their homes at a deep discount. Then, they'll rent those same homes back to the families who just lost them, creating a permanent stream of cash flow from what was once middle-class wealth. The scale will be unprecedented. Billionaire investor Barry Sternlicht predicts over $1 trillion in losses for office real estate alone. Morgan Stanley expects this crash to be worse than 2008. But here is the darkest twist. The very institutions that created this bubble will be the ones buying up the wreckage. Big banks will foreclose on properties, then sell them to their private equity partners. The Fed will provide liquidity to these same institutions while ordinary families lose their homes. It's a closed loop, a system designed to transfer wealth upwards in a crisis. Have you ever felt like the system is rigged against you, that no matter how hard you work, you're just falling further behind? Well, what if I told you it's not just a feeling, it's a design? A wealth extraction machine is revving its engines, and it's aimed squarely at the dream of home ownership. This isn't about a market failure, it's about how the machine works. And it's leading us towards a future where you will own nothing. Let's talk about the stages. We're currently in what I call stage 4, where the system socializes losses and privatizes gains. When the next crisis hits, taxpayers will be forced to bail out the too big to fail institutions. At the same time, those very institutions will be using that bailout money and their massive cash reserves to scoop up the assets of everyday people who can't keep up with their loans. By the end of this stage, property ownership will become dramatically more concentrated. Home ownership rates could plummet to levels we haven't seen since the 1940s, effectively destroying the middle-class dream for an entire generation. Then comes stage 5, the new normal. This is when the concentrated ownership from stage 4 becomes permanent. We'll be living in a rentier economy. Most people won't own their homes. They'll pay rent to massive institutional landlords forever. We're already seeing this happen. In cities like Atlanta and Phoenix, institutional investors own up to 30% of single-family rental homes. They outbid families with all-cash offers, not because they want a place to live, but because they want to extract rent from you forever. Think about their business model. It's brilliant for them, but devastating for us. They buy distressed properties with cash during a crisis. Then, they rent those homes back to the very families who may have lost them in the first place. They never sell. They just collect cash flow in perpetuity while property values recover. After the crash I see coming in 2025 to 2026, this model will go national. Private equity firms will own millions of homes. Office buildings will be converted to rentals. The result? A society where most Americans pay rent to Wall Street for the rest of their lives. This isn't just some wild theory. Blackstone CEO, Stephen Schwarzman, has openly talked about the rentier revolution, where individual ownership is replaced by institutional ownership. And you've probably heard the now infamous line from the World Economic Forum: "You will own nothing and be happy." This transition from ownership to rental isn't an accident, it's the intended outcome. The long-term implications are staggering. When people can't build wealth through real estate, they become permanently dependent on the institutions that own their housing. This creates a neo-feudal system, a small number of institutional lords who own everything, and a massive class of tenant serfs who pay them tribute just to have a roof over their heads. The middle class as we know it disappears. Society divides into owners and renters, with almost no way to move from one group to the other. So, let me give you the timeline and why I believe 2025 to 2026 will be so much worse than 2008. The math is inescapable. By the end of 2025, $1 trillion in commercial real estate debt is due to be refinanced. Properties bought at 3% interest rates will have to refinance at 7 or 8%, but those buildings have already lost up to 40% of their value. Most borrowers can't afford the new payments. This will trigger defaults. Regional banks are sitting on a time bomb. They hold $2.7 trillion in these commercial real estate loans. For many small banks, their exposure to this debt is more than double their total capital. When the defaults start, these banks will become insolvent. Unlike 2008, it's not just a few big banks. It's hundreds of smaller ones, all at risk. The Federal Reserve faces an impossible choice: cut interest rates and risk runaway inflation. or keep rates high and guarantee a wave of defaults and bank failures. Either path leads to chaos. Here's my prediction based on the data. The crisis begins in mid-2025 with major commercial real estate defaults. It spreads to regional banks by early 2026, which then triggers a residential mortgage crisis by the middle of that year. By early 2027, we could be looking at a full systemic collapse. The reason it will be more severe than 2008 is that the debt levels are exponentially larger and the economy is leveraged to the hilt in every single sector. The house of cards is bigger, and the fall will be harder. It's crucial to understand these dynamics, not to spread fear, but to prepare. Knowledge is your best defense in a system designed to keep you in the dark. The coming real estate collapse is about to complete the greatest wealth transfer in American history, and when the dust settles, there will be clear winners and losers. The question is, which side will you be on? First, let's talk about the winners, the ones with cash ready to deploy. We're talking about private equity giants like Blackstone, KKR, and Apollo. They're poised to scoop up trillions of dollars in real estate at rock-bottom depression-era prices. The major banks that survive this storm won't just stay afloat, they'll consolidate the market, swallowing up their failed competitors. Sovereign wealth funds from around the world are also circling, ready to buy up American real estate at historic discounts. Even big tech companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft will come out ahead. As commercial property values plummet around them, they'll acquire prime office space for pennies on the dollar. Don't forget agricultural landowners. As investors flee from financial assets, they'll rush towards hard assets like farmland, driving up its value. And of course, billionaires like Warren Buffett, who have been sitting on massive piles of cash, will finally deploy their capital. They'll buy assets at 50 to 70% discounts, emerging from the crisis far wealthier and owning a much larger slice of the economy. Now, for the other side of the coin, the losers. This is where it gets painful for most people. The middle class, whose primary source of wealth is their home, will see it evaporate. We're looking at a potential 30 to 50% drop in housing wealth, wiping out $10 to $15 trillion from the middle class's net worth. To put that in perspective, that's 3 times larger than the devastation of 2008. Stockholders and bondholders in regional banks, many will be completely wiped out as hundreds of these institutions fail. Pension funds and insurance companies that hold commercial mortgage securities will face staggering losses. Retirees who were depending on their real estate investments will watch their life savings disappear. Commercial real estate investors who bought at the peak will lose everything. And small business owners who used their property as collateral, they'll face bankruptcy when their property values collapse below their loan amounts. Anyone with an adjustable rate mortgage will face payment shocks they simply can't afford, leading to a wave of foreclosures. Millions of families will lose homes they've lived in for years. The psychological impact will be devastating. For 80 years, Americans have been taught that real estate is a guaranteed path to wealth. That belief is about to be permanently shattered, changing how an entire generation spends and invests. But here's the most important thing you need to understand. This is not a natural disaster. Real estate crashes are not accidents. They are engineered wealth transfers that happen with mathematical precision every 15 to 20 years. The pattern is always the same. First, make money cheap and easy to get. This inflates asset prices. Watch as the middle class takes on massive debt to chase the dream. Then, make money expensive. This triggers defaults and foreclosures. Finally, the institutions with cash step in and buy up all the distressed assets for pennies on the dollar, renting them back to the very people who used to own them. This time, it's the largest wealth transfer in American history because the debt levels are the largest in American history. Over $20 trillion in real estate debt will be restructured, defaulted on, or transferred to new owners. Think of it as a 5-stage process. Stage 1, the setup, is already complete. Stage 2, denial, is just now ending. Stage 3, the cascade of failures, is set to begin in 2025. Stage 4, the peak of the wealth transfer, will happen in 2026, and by 2027, we'll be in Stage 5, the establishment of a permanent rentier economy. The Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and the big banks know this timeline. They've run the stress tests. They understand the math. They're not trying to prevent the collapse. They are positioning themselves to manage it in a way that benefits the institutions they serve, while the losses get passed on to the taxpayers. The collapse isn't some distant threat. It has already begun. The only question left is whether you'll recognize what's happening before the transfer is complete, or if you'll end up reading about it in the history books written by the people who end up owning everything. If this helped you see the pattern, then you understand what's coming and why the next few years will permanently reshape our society. Thanks for watching.